Good afternoon. Thank you for being here in such a number. I know this is not the easy time with quite significant heat this afternoon. So we'll try to be interesting enough to keep you with us. To reindustrialize France, well, France clearly today is part of the major European countries. We've lost most of the highest number of industries in the last decades until the beginning of the 2000s. We even thought that service jobs would replace industrial jobs, and some big industrial managers recommended a factory-free plant. France. So this led to major dependency of France on the industrial level, which was revealed during the COVID crisis, dependence, fragmentation, extreme of production processes. Since then, bring the industry back to France is a priority for the various politicians. The idea is now agreed, but is it taking shape? This is the purpose of our discussion this afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome Bernard Fontana, the CEO of EDF, French Electricity Board, Olivier GAVALDA, Director General of the Crédit Agricole, Hélène, HUBY, founder and General Director of the Exploration Company. In 2 words, Hélène, possibly people might not know your company. You work for the construction of a space capsule for freight transport. And Vincent POLICARD, partner and co-responsible of infrastructure activities in KKR, and Philippe SETBON, Director General of BPCE Group. And Maya BACACHE-BEAUVALLET will set the stage of this discussion. Is there a sort of a weakening of the reindustrialization process? Are we running late? Do you have figures as well? Hello, good afternoon. The topic X is here to face the realities. So we should talk about deindustrialization rather than reindustrialization. I'll start with that phrase, less optimistic than usual for the Rencontre d'Aix. Why? I'll start with an anecdote. In 1992 in the US, Paul Krugman, who is the major economist, a specialist of industrial economy, and he wants a job with Bill Clinton, who was a governor at the time, Arkansas. And Bill Clinton said, how can we reindustrialize the US? Because you're a specialist. I can hire you if you explain to me how we do it. And Paul Krugman said, well, sorry, sir, but it's not feasible. It's not feasible. We won't be able to reindustrialize. And therefore, the anecdote ends that Paul Krugman was not hired by Bill Clinton, but it was good news for him. Then he is now a Nobel Prize of Economy in 2008, so it wasn't such a bad idea. Why is it difficult to industrialize? Because the industry brings to the fore the agglomeration effect. Agglomeration effect is that when an industry sets up somewhere, it will attract other activities, competitive industries. It seems paradoxical. We think, okay, well, if you're a competitor, you'll go away from your competitor because you don't want to have a price war, and just to grab a piece of market. No. What leads usually is the agglomeration effect. Next to your competitor, there will be the subcontractors who are specialized in your domain. You will find them labor who's been skilled and competent in your domain, and so on and so forth. So those agglomeration effect are long-term effect, they're historical effects. So to reverse the agglomeration effect is difficult, but it is also extremely costly. You can try to do everything, but the problem is the scope of the investment necessary to reverse the agglomeration effect. To talk in simple words, when we talk about agglomeration effect, we talk about Silicon Valley in the US. We think about the finance around Europe, the coal and steel industry. So there's strong phenomenon. So to talk about reindustrialization today, it means that we have to take into account the long-term effects, the historical effects of agglomeration, which are in progress. Which doesn't mean we can't do a thing, you know, we'll discuss that today, but simply we have to take into account such effects. Second point I want to do to set the discussion for the economists, at least, I mean, what seems important to me, it's not so much that it is industry, services or something else. What counts is productivity, innovation, what will generate gains of revenues, of enrichment for work, capital, and so on and so forth. So the key question is, are we late in terms of productivity in Europe and in France, more specifically? Are we late in terms of innovation? And clearly the diagnostic is fairly brutal. And in fact, I'm sure we're going to talk about that. Now, maybe to frame the questions that the speakers will address, I think there is 4 questions that we can ask ourselves. First one is, what industries are we talking about? When we talk about reindustrialization, we talk about saving the automotive industry. Are we talking about solving the too big to fail domain in domains where with a lot of employment and facilities? Or are we talking about tomorrow's industry with productivity, innovation? And around the question is my answer. You know, well, I'm sure we're going to discuss that. Second question is the leverage. And I think delivers to that, and I'm sure we were going to discuss that. How can we explain, how can we do it? What can we do to help these industries to be innovative? And of course, there will be an important topic about the prices and the cost, especially the cost of energy for these industries, not just that, infrastructures and what the state or local authorities or others, network companies can do. Third question is, how can we articulate these innovation stakes, you know, with the major challenge today, decarbonation. So tomorrow's climatic goals with the 40 degrees here, you know, no need to remind you that these are quite burning questions. It's a hot topic. So look how to reconcile the 2 points. And then finish the fourth question, which is that of the framework within which all this will take place. It's a French framework. Is it European, and how to invent the new industry, which is not longer a world of free trade and peace that we've known in the previous years, but which is probably a world which is more protectionist with a real sovereignty challenge. Lots of difficult questions. I'm sure our speakers have a lot of things to say. So I'll leave the floor with no further ado. Thank you, Maya, for your introduction. Yes, indeed. You said it, electricity, energy is kind of the key point for industrial world. Bernard Fontana, you are one of the levers of competitiveness for the industry and for the sovereignty. How can we make sure today that the energy you produce is as cheap as possible? Well, to do industry, indeed, you need energy, and more or less, depending on the activities, but it is one of the elements of the competitiveness of the industry. This energy has to be available, reliable, and competitive. In France, this is the case. Electricity, it is reliable, competitive. I won't give you figures, too many figures, but we know the mean price of wholesale market on the forward 2026 for the first semester 2020. In France, 65 euros per megawatt hour. Spain, the Netherlands 84, Germany 88, the UK 93, Italy 108. So this is the environment where we see but there is also an electrical system which a grid which is highly competitive. Moreover, our energy, electricity is decarbonated at 95%, you know. It is 10 times less in Germany. I mean, some countries have different rates, but we can feel that this is a structural phenomenon of decarbonation. It is attractive, and I can see we can attract data centers which need power with these characteristics. And you talked, it is sovereign. For example, we did export almost 100 terawatt-hours of electricity for almost 5 billion, whereas we imported 63 billion of fossil energy. So it is local jobs as well. It's a domain. It's an industry to increase the lifespan of the nuclear stock. And for the EPR2, we'll have to recruit 100,000 people in our industrial fabric within the next 10 years. And I can see that Framatome, onshores in production in France, Arabelle with the turbine, re-internalized productions in France. We are creating, in addition to the availability of our electricity, we're creating an industrial movement in France. Beyond that, what you mentioned was the electrification of usages, which is also a source of challenges, industrial challenges. So I think basically we do have conditions. There are difficulties. Of course, there are situations to be improved. We work with our clients, especially in terms of contracts, but we have elements that will make it possible to fight to reindustrialize France. Hélène, HUBY. For you, reindustrialization, is it something technical or is it highly political? You do space freight, you fabricate space capsules, things that Americans know how to do, the Chinese, the Russian, but there is no European space capsule. You are doing that. Now the question, public or tender offer procurement is necessary? Well, first, it's a fact. More than my company has 3 years. We started 4. Now it's more 300, and we got factories in France, in Bordeaux, in Germany, in Italy, and we open in the Emirates, and we are in the US already. So indeed, in catchment basins, which makes sense in terms of technology, Munich in Germany, Bordeaux because the M51, Houston, elsewhere. 2 questions here. Can we have the right technologies? Because in what we do, space capsules, and as of next year, rockets, there are technologies that we don't control at all in Europe. They are done in China, in Russia, in the US. So what we've done, we opened in the US. We have partners, and Europeans work with SpaceX, and today are joining us. That's the way we proceed, very simply. I want to mention that we have a competitive advantage, significant, regardless of the electricity price in Europe. European engineer in aerospace is 50% cheaper, was 33% cheaper than the aerospace engineer in the US. So we do have a competitive advantage in Europe. Then the balance between public and private, well, what we're creating in Europe, in fact, for the first time in the story of space in Europe, we create a model that comes from the US, applied to the US for about 10, 15 years. It's called commercial space. To make a capsule, it's one of the most complex products among all space vehicles. Only 3 countries can do it. Normally, I should have gone to France, Italy, Germany, and I would have said, give me 1 billion and I'll come up with the capsule. Well, I went to see private investors first, TUT, Cherry, Partech, normal, venture capitalists, normal. I said, I have a team, leading team, and we take 100% of the European market, we said 50% of the American market, because SpaceX is retiring the capsule. Americans will need a new capsule. Give us money, we'll deliver. And in less than 5 years, we had 2 space capsules on air. So we established our technical credibility. Now I see government, they will pay half of the normal cost, because half of the cost has already been paid by private investors. So gain of money for the taxpayers. The jobs we create are sustainable, durable jobs. We could have, we have to have the market fit of the capsule, sustainable jobs, durable jobs. We don't have to subsidize the product, and we move faster because this period, 3, 4, 5 years of negotiation between states, we clear that by starting with private financing. So it's a new model for space industry we bring to Europe. It could be applied to a lot of industry. Public orders come with the state as a client to anchor the product, but as a state that will provide subsidies, and as a state that will establish competition between main groups and startups. The competition of capsules in Europe, we won it, number 1 with Thales, Airbus, Dassault, and so on and so forth. I'll stop now, but this is the new model for industrialization. The state is the anchoring client and put in competition historical jobs, which have an amazing competence historic, together with new jobs for new technologies, and then, shall the best win. Let the best win. The winner will be the best. So, do you share this view? Public procurement does not suffice. You need public-private partnership? Yeah. And maybe I'll start as the Americans. When you got when you are a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I look at this aspect of deindustrialization through infrastructures. There will be needs, huge needs, development, investment in infrastructures in the coming years, which will be highly structuring for competitiveness of the industry in France and in Europe. So it applies in traditional infrastructures, it applies in new infrastructures. When I talk about traditional ones, I talk about transport, or highways, ports, railways, airports. And then to take two examples that will be quite structuring in France in the coming years, with a key question of allotment of investment and risk between public and private. First, highways. You know the highways contract because will end in 5 to 10 years. So the choice of the model will be quite structuring for motorways and for the industry. Second example is on the bridges, because ports. When we see in Europe, when we go to Antwerp, Rotterdam, or if you go to French ports like Dunkirk, Aropa, not far, Marseille, Fos, all those ports need to redefine themselves, need to invest and to transform themselves, and their ability to transform or not will define competitiveness. So that's for the traditional infrastructure. Then there is what I call the new infrastructures, so mainly digital and energy transition. So digital, it is something we've discussed in France recently with the AI Summit and other initiatives of this kind. We do need to invest in digital centers, and then in this topic, industrial decarbonation, which goes through renewable energies or decarbonated energies, or other, because there are new electrification of industrial processes directly or indirectly through what we call green molecules, hydrogen, ammonia, which indirectly can decarbonated industrial branches such as steel industry, chemistry, fertilizers, cement, everything that is energy intensive. So those subjects are very structuring for the economy, for the industry. We've seen it in the Draghi report, because Draghi report discussed that issue of infrastructure, makes it a central topic for competitiveness and economic growth in Europe, and more recently in the program of the German government, because one of the key aspect is a 500 billion euro fund to invest in infrastructures in energy transition. So that's public money, but that will be complemented by private money as well. Olivier GAVALDA. How do you finance that? How can you, open savings to find the financing and support in the territory the industrial notion? Well, today what we can say is that French banks, and of course the Crédit Agricole, which is the largest fund provider of the French economy, will support this project in France. And unlike preconceived ideas, we don't have any lack of funding. We actually have lack of projects. This is the topic. We have a lack of projects. However, if tomorrow things had to speed up, we can see the will of Europe and France to accelerate projects, and especially versus all the issues of sovereignty. Well, we have to remove two types of constraint to accelerate the funding and facilitate it. First one is the regulation, the weight of regulations. If we could lighten by 1% the constraints imposed in terms of equities, our own equities. If we could lighten by 1%, we would clear 120 billion additional funding. 120 billion, it's a huge figure. Compare this, you know what's the weight of the industrial fabric in France in terms of credit? It's 187 billion euros. So we double, and this will accelerate with the bulk cap constraints. When our friends, competitors in the US, where they are lowering them, we are raising them. So there will be a true issue, and we can be the onshoring or outshoring of the industry goes to the US, of course. But basically, there is also this problem. Then there is the PAP, private partnership. So public-private partnership. Sorry. So we do have a lot of things to do, and the union of investment in savings. We still it's been discussed for 20 years, but nothing's been done. Not much has been done. Second point, we have to, and the initiatives have just been taken. I'm talking about the finance label, which propose savings which is targeting European projects. And finally, there is a subtopic which may be borderline, which is the crypto money, and especially stable coins today. Massively, European players, the European they buy about 200 billion, but this is savings that finances, the US debt and US project, whereas in Europe, we're still trying to imagine if we should or not have a stable coin in euros. It exists, but it's very small. And we still talk about the digital euro, which doesn't make sense, in fact, because very remote and very costly, actually. Philippe SETBON. What sector do you identify? How do you choose the sectors? How do you orientate yourselves? Savings to this industrial investment. How do you do that? Hello. 2 introductions, 3, just to correct. I don't want to have any problems when I get back to the office. I'm only delegate director general of Natixis and in charge of the management of assets. So I'll talk about savings and what we do with collected savings. 2 comments. My top, basic savings is not an aggregate that you can move around. Savings is the sum of all your individual savings. In order to have a correct orientation, we have to make sure that the utilization will be attractive for each and every one of us. I think this is a key point. The second thing is that, as you said, there is an abundant saving in Europe, in France. 18% of saving rate in France. It's huge. We got abundant savings, and thanks or because of I said because, but thanks to the monetary policies which are very accommodating in the last 15 years. Well, it stopped for a while, but we got also a lot of cash flow, so we can reorient it. And so how do we make this productive and put it to work, especially to finance? And I think the discussion is been well set. Thank you, because the topic is how do we create reindustrialization or industrialization, because it's to industrialize differently towards something else, which is a long-term cycle topic, which goes beyond the electoral mandate on the one hand, and second, which should find its resources, its competitiveness at its own resource throughout the duration of the project. So within our group, we do have a lot of vectors to finance that. We do it through our banks, because they finance and so on and so forth. In terms of savings, clearly we do have levers at the domestic level and European level. It would be absurd to think that we can reindustrialize France without European dynamics around it. So it would be a mistake. So we have simple things to do at the domestic, Tax system must be stable if we want to have the household tax and foreign investment stability. Second, reinforcement of financial education. Simply, there are many reasons, but mainly because those are long cycles, and therefore, I'm sorry to say it that way, but the industrial cycles are not the Bitcoin cycles. So you need the corresponding savings corresponding to the cycle. So that goes through long product, but long products, we have them. We got great products, life insurance in France, and the PE, but they can be reinforced. They will be reinforced. Several leads to be done at the domestic level. We may introduce, if there is some alignment, there will be a major political debate. We can introduce pension schemes in addition to the existing system, and this will finance long jobs that we need. So there is a bit of domestic initiative, and there is at the European level, which are quite crucial indeed. you introduced something interesting in this debate. This is the reindustrialization to be thought purely at the level of France or at the European level, and the European framework should be privileged in the reflection. Bernard Fontana, is this a reflection for you done at the European level? How do you hinge the next challenges? There are some countries where we have a written balance for us challenges. Well, there are assets and we have to preserve them. And the first thing to do is, again, when it's possible, to extend the lifespan of the nuclear reactors. It's good for competitiveness, but it is good for industrial activity. I have 11, the CP1 reactor 11. If we place more powerful turbines, we will clear terawatts. We'll have more terawatts. Well, we have to go for it, look for them, and this is work for the Belfort plants. So this is the kind of answers we can provide. Then we have to renew the park, 6 or 8 more EPRs, and we do that with safety and security, capital and lead time. How can we go faster? And it is also a topic for us and our initial partners. Do we look at one of saying how are we to do this? And the partners of the domain said there could be an agreement for performance for the EPRs to succeed the EPRs, and I do agree, and we're going to sign it later on to show our commitment and our ability to do performance together, because it is work from a domain we have to do together. We'll do it in France, but we can extend it as well to other activities internationally and in Europe especially. Hydraulics, well, this is of course white water electricity. We have to modernize the stock. You know, we have a great energy. We may even increase our production capabilities, but the challenge is to pull out of the you know, with the problem we have with the European Union for 15 years, and I hope this is a problem we're going to deal with. And we talked about the network. It's all very well. You modernize the network, adapt it to the new configuration, work on the stability, and keep working and optimize the network, take advantage of interconnections. In addition to that, there is one topic that has to be dealt with, the adaptation of all our devices to climate change. Because if we project ourselves in 15 years, possibly, when, you know, temperatures of river will be warmer, flow rates will be slower. So we do have solutions, and we have to start with no-brainers. We shut down. We had to stop a power plant because, because the cooling water is warmer than the actually water to be cooled. So, so this is the kind of provisions that we have ahead of us. Beyond that, the electrification of usages are mentioned. This is clearly, we have to go for that. And to succeed all this, we need women, men, who are engaged, committed, who join the industry, who join us in our production of energy. And this is work at the national level, but also at the level of the regions to get apprentices, women, to have their strengths in the industry. And these are challenges which are fascinating, and with the quality of the people already there, their pride and their commitment, I'm optimistic. And I want to thank all my colleagues and all the partners of the domain.
And how do you deal with the question around the energy mix? There's a whole debate about the role of renewable energies. How do you see this? Well, yes, we develop wind power. I visited our wind power fleet around here 2 days ago. And I think the question here is to do with government decisions around uses, and this will be the decisions being made around demand questions, and we'll do this in order to make sure we succeed with the challenges we're facing. Vincent, POLICARD, in order to reach the objectives around reducing carbon in industry, there are massive needs in this sector. Would you say that France is well positioned because of its energy mix? Well, if I want to be a bit provocative, I think there are two things that we really need to get hold of. First of all, you're asking this question about reindustrialization of France. That means if we focus in that way, we're already on the wrong path, because we can only do this together with our European partners. First of all, because of the cost of energy that we've talked about. If we just leave nature to do its work, renewable energy and the production of renewable energy will happen in southern Europe, in Spain, and in Portugal, around solar power, in northern Europe, Scandinavia, around hydroelectric power and offshore wind. And then, of course, the energy prices that Bernard was talking about in the middle, in France and Germany and Belgium, etc. We don't have any natural advantages in this area. So, of course, there's the nuclear power, which is a part. So we really need to accept this European approach, which industries are going to be able to remain competitive and benefit from this European approach and end up with some comparative advantages. And the second reason why this all has to be done at the European level is that no European market has the size to have a really competitive industry. So that's the first thing that really seems very important to me. And the second point, which comes back to your question, is that we need to recreate this culture of public-private partnerships. Today, this cohabitation of public and private partnerships, as Hélène was saying, it's not natural, but it really is very important. To take an example, it's really very important. If we look at the hydrogen plan from France, we're looking at 9 billion euros up to 2030, which seems like a fairly high figure, but we have been looking at a green steel production program in Sweden, which is seeking to build a 2.5 million ton production capacity plant of green steel. 130 million is the total production, so this is 2% of the steel production in Europe. In order to build these first factories in Europe, the promoter raised 6.5 billion. So this is 2% of steel, and steel is one of the industrial branches that need to see reduced carbon. So that amount is 70% of the French hydrogen plan. So these figures just gives an idea of the order of magnitudes in terms of investment capacities, and the investment capacities of states are really different between private investment and public investment. Philippe SETBON, I think you wanted to respond to this. I think, as we've just heard, all of this is happening at a European level, and it can only happen at a European level because it's the only market which gives us the size we need to make sure that there is an ongoing competitivity at a global level, because competitivity is a global thing. So that's clear. So what can we do at a European level? Well, we have a window of opportunity here, because for the first time in 12 or 14 months, for this first time, we're talking about the competitivity of the European economy. This has never happened before. There's an alignment of interest. This comes out of the Draghi report and the state report that came out in spring 2024. Nevertheless, I think here we've been aware of this for the last 20 years. I think all of us would agree with this, but now we can show the reports that are showing this. The second thing is that the big perspective that we need to have is we need to create a virtuous circle in Europe. Savings, focusing savings on investment into business, which would make it possible to fund the innovations we're talking about, which make it possible to fund the transitions we're talking about so that they can succeed and so we can all succeed together. And this would make it possible to improve competitivity, profitability, and therefore yields for the savers that we all are, the investors that we all are. This is essential because today we have 300 billion euros of European savings, more or less, that are exported every year. That's a significant amount. But people are right to go and invest elsewhere because there's better yields elsewhere. So why should we stop them doing that? So how can we change this situation? So we've got this Finance Europe plan with 7 European countries that are seeking to bring in place an alignment in order to have long-term products invested today at about 70%. I think that's a fairly low figure. with a minimum duration of 5 years, and so that would help us to move in the way we're thinking. So that's a good first step. It would give us levers for funding, but it's not enough. Because in order to execute this, I think we've got some banks here, we've got asset managers, we've got insurers who are here in the room, who have been on other panels. So these savers are at the center of the collection of these savings and the reuse of these savings. We really need finance services that are very strong in Europe, and that's not the case. We have some great banks, and that's great, but the financial services that we have are not competitive in terms of, and they're not competitive with what was going on, particularly in, say, North America. That means that in Europe, not only do we need to put in place industrialization by raising finance, but we also need to change our system, which has been in place for the last 50 years. We need to stop focusing exclusively on protecting consumers, and we need to focus also on production. These are the same people. You are consumers, but we're all consumers because we are human beings. So we are also producers. And perhaps a last point before handing on the microphone: Europe is not a superpower because it has 450 million consumers. We will be a superpower when we have 450 million producers. So we really need to focus on production, and we need to be competitive in all areas. That's the only way to reindustrialize in a long-term manner. Thank you. Olivier GAVALDA, do we need to focus on national champions? Is the fabric of France strong enough to help us with this competitivity at a national and international level? So, with Crédit Agricole, the development of this industrialization and of new industrial projects must go through local territories, because there needs to be space, there needs to be transport, there needs to be people. There needs also to be a fabric of SMEs that is upstream and downstream of these industrial sectors. And so it's really important to support these SMEs, these small and medium-sized businesses that often struggle to keep up in these industrial programs. Often subcontractors struggle to support the growth that's happening, and this is really decisive for our future. So we need to support them. With Crédit Agricole, we've decided to put in a number of different systems. We've put in place systems put in support to the agricultural industry, the pharmaceutical industry, aviation. We're putting in place skills so that we can support this fabric of SMEs. We're doing this through equity. We've got some specialized funds for small players, for small businesses, and we need to also have teams that make connections between local authorities and these big industrial projects and these SMEs, because regulations are difficult. So there's a whole number of initiatives that we need to support. We need not just to have a perspective through mega projects. Of course, there is Europe, but we also need to look at financing. We need local territories, local areas. So we were hearing from you earlier that we need to have European talent, that sometimes you had to get talent from US and Asia. Do you think Europe can develop this, Hélène, HUBY? Well, the answer is very simple, and the answer is yes, and we can prove this because last week we saw a technical progress for Europe for the first time. We had a capsule enter at an orbital speed. So you might not understand that, but that's 8 kilometers a second, and this is something that Europe had never done in its history, and this is a technical milestone, and it's something that's absolutely essential if we want to bring back objects and people from space. That's something that we've done. So we've shown that we can do this as Europeans. I want to come back to perhaps 3 things that we could improve, but I also want to say slightly provocatively, we, as the exploration company, we don't have any financing issues. We've raised a whole number of the biggest Series A investment, Series B investment. Every time we've been oversubscribed. In 2.5 years, we signed 800 million euros of contract with the majority of clients who are in the US. What does that mean? It means that the priority of priorities for me to develop industry is the validity of the project, because our cycles in our professions are important. We don't make a product in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. A rocket or a space capsule takes between 5 to 10 years to build, and then it operates for 15 years. So I want to say that we really need not to make any mistakes about the product we're developing, because if we invest 1 billion or 3 billions on something that takes 6 years to be developed, and then it needs to be at the top of the market for the next 10 years, and we've made a mistake, well, that's a mega problem. So the validity of the project is really very important, and in order to have a valid project, you need to be thinking 20 years ahead of time. You need to think about the weak signals of markets and the technologies that I can see now, and what are the risks that I'm ready to take now, because in terms of analyzing markets and technologies, we can make mistakes. And so this analysis needs to be carried out by entrepreneurs, by big industrial groups, but also at the highest level of state in France and in Europe. And that's something that's lacking. We don't have a lack of visionary entrepreneurs. I don't think we lack any the visionary big industrial groups either. But if I think of the US, where they have the Space Council with people from startups, academics, big groups, representatives from NASA, and they start asking the questions about the space services and products that we're going to have in 20 years' time. They're thinking long term, they're thinking big, and that's something that is really lacking in Europe. Thinking long term, working with knowledge that comes from a number of different sectors, and making decisions about really investing in champions. The second thing that we're lacking, and this is really very basic, I'll give you a very clear example. So as you've understood, we do engines for capsules, and after that we're going to do rockets. So you test engines. So I need a test bench for engines. So it's been 2 years I've been fighting in the region where we are in order to develop my test bench. There's nothing better than a test bench generating jobs. So it really costs a lot of money, and once you've invested in putting it there, you don't want to go somewhere else. So we're going to create hundreds of jobs around this, and we're not going to move for the next 10, 20 years. That's clear. But we haven't been able to start building for the last 2.5 years because there's tiny little problems. We've got problems with frogs, and we've got problem with the vipers and snakes that are in the particular habitat. So we need to move them to another habitat. But if I go to Texas and I can say that I've got a daughter in Texas, after 2 months you get the permit and you create your test bench, and that is an enormous problem for industry because you invest hundreds of millions of euros in infrastructure, and we're at the mercy of the results of associations. Of course we need to respect the environment, but we need to balance this out. And this test bench is to test for the first time green engines that respect the environment more. And I can't do this because of frogs and vipers and snakes that are in the particular area where we want to build. And so we really need to have, like with airports, if you've got a project for an airport, you've got a fast track system. If you have a really super important project and you're among top startups, you need a fast pass so that your project can be dealt with very quickly. And if I can just take one more moment, the last thing I'd just like to mention is that it's important to have this strategic vision. It's important to make it possible for land to be opened up, but it's also really important to have a European approach. I've really experienced this myself because I created our business on the same day in France and in Germany. We are the space startup in Europe that has the biggest growth. 6 months after this, we ended up with an audit about whether we were really German. The question was, in the end, they concluded that we're Franco-German. And then in France, I won't give you the name of the institution, but people say, well, she put her head office in German. She's not really French. We need to be suspicious of them. You know, Germans, they steal jobs from us. We really need not to support her because Germans steal our jobs. I've had to fight on both the German side and the French side to say that we need not to be thinking at a national level, but at a European level, or even at a global level. And that's something that we need to be doing in order to change mindsets, national mindsets. Thank you. Thank you, Hélène, HUBY. So we've got about 10 minutes left. I suggest that we hand over to you because around these questions of standards, these questions of reducing carbon sectors and projects to support, I imagine you've got some questions. So over to you, the man at the back there. Perhaps you could just introduce yourself. Yes, thank you. I am a teacher in a business school after 28 years of professional experience. I really love the term of reindustrialization and industrialization. Like many French people, I've experienced disindustrialization. The only thing I haven't really heard is what we do with young people in this. I love teaching. I teach international business, and I often ask students, among you young people, how many of you want to work in industry? How many of you want to innovate in industry? Is that something that seems important to you? But I'm sorry, but the answer is no. I'm for digital technology. I'm into community management. So how are we going to change mentalities? So that's a big question that I just want to throw at you, really. So how can we help young people to love industry? Send them to us, to the EDF group. And we will be delighted to have interns. Here, the Framatome, where I come from, recruits 600 interns every year, and they discover industry. And we're really very delighted to recruit many of them. Some of them then want to go on to continue their studies. And I think it's this initiative of really wanting to open up our industries, getting people involved young. I think that's really important. So I am totally available to you. I'm very happy to help. Perhaps just to respond as well, of course we need to communicate, of course, space that makes people dream, so we really have no issue recruiting. But I think there's also something that teaching could do better. We employ Swedes, Germans, French, etc. And I like employing Germans and the Dutch and Swiss because at university they do things. They actually have practical experience. My children are in secondary school and they do things. They actually get their hands dirty, as it were. But in France we tend to just think. I have a daughter who's 11 years old, and she made her own aeroplane. And this is just a thing that she did in her school. This is something that we could improve here. Of course, we need to communicate better, but perhaps French communication could also do more. Olivier, GAVALDA. Yes, just a few days ago, I was at an event with the École Polytechnique, and the director of this was saying that increasing numbers of students increasingly wanted to get involved in industry. So let's be optimistic about the future. I believe in it. Maya, perhaps just to give a bit of context to this question, it's really important to just be aware about what we mean by industry. I should have said this at the beginning, but we don't have time to do everything because it's worth just being careful. When we talk about industry, we're all thinking about Charlie Chaplin making cars and metallurgy. So, because the whole areas of digital technologies are producing productivity. Digital technology isn't just about community management, it's also productive. There's a whole number of areas associated with services and industry, so we just need to be careful with this categorization when we're thinking about industrialization and making it more attractive to younger generations. It's important just to bear this in mind. Thank you very much. Another question in the room? There's a man here at the back. Perhaps we could bring you a microphone. So we've got a question from a journalist. Yes, good afternoon. In terms of space technology, what you've done is really amazing in terms of making, producing a space capsule like Elon Musk. And the question would be, how much time, how far behind are we from him, and how long is it going to take us for us to catch up on Elon Musk, to be able to take off a rocket and maybe even 5 rockets every X number of months? How are we going to catch up? How long is it going to take us? And has Europe got the resources to do it? Make Europe great again. There's the cap. Hélène, over to you. So I would not have founded the exploration company in Europe if I wasn't really confident that we could catch up here. The example I give is the example of Airbus, which was a long way behind Boeing. There was a first phase of technological catch-up and then technological innovation with the A320, which revolutionized the way we make airplanes. So I hope we're in this catch-up phase. We need to be clear. The objective we've got is that we need to go faster. We need to double our speed. We need to double our financing. I said we've got no problem with money, but the truth is the people we're competing with have almost infinite money. So Europe really needs to take seriously the questions of finance, and we need to build alliances with the Middle East, which lacks skills but doesn't lack financing. So first of all, there's this catch-up phase. That's what we've tried to do with the capsule. If we do a rocket next year, of course, it will be reusable. And second, we're thinking about the product for 20 years' time. Is Starship the right product? I'm not sure about that. In 10 years' time, if we have a revolutionary product that's different from Starship, then we perhaps have some opportunities to win. It's a small chance, so we really need to go for it very seriously. And all partners really need to work together with the state. So I'm really expecting a lot from the summit on space. But there is an opportunity there. And you're really going to make the most of this opportunity, I believe. Thank you, Hélène. We've got just time for 1 or 2 more questions. Over to you, sir. Thank you. I'm Pierre-Alexis. I'm a business leader. Mrs. HUBY, you talked about the cost of employment. You talked about a French engineer or a European engineer costing a third of the American engineer costs. But what about other competitors, India and China, in terms of is the cost of employment in France should be covered around this question of reindustrialization? Perhaps I could answer in a very personal manner in terms of our business. We are in a very privileged situation because the technologies that we are using are not going to serve the Russian market, but the Indian market. So we're not in direct competition with Chinese technologies. Our professions are also very technical, so we have people who've been trained for 10 or 15 years by other people. And how do we keep them? So our salary policy at the beginning was to not pay lots of money but give a lot of shares, a little stock. And now we're transforming our approach, and we're paying slightly over the market because people are working really hard. They have skills that are sometimes unique. I have people of whom there are 10 of them in the world that have these skills. These are people I can't lose, and so it's really important to keep them. And also because when we build a space vessel, it's not a 6-month project. This is a 5 or 6 year project. And so we can't have key people leaving during development, so perhaps we're in a privileged position because other industries are facing much more significant direct competition. I think that's one of the reasons I have hope in Europe, because SpaceX is a lot cheaper than us, but they pay their employees. If I pay someone from SpaceX, they receive 300,000 in shares at SpaceX, and that doubles every year with SpaceX. But we pay them a lot less here in Europe, but I really hope that we're able to keep people. And I think if we keep going that way, there will be a change in the situation. Philippe SETBON, perhaps I could just answer your question without really going to the heart of the question. First of all, what I can see is that production systems, from the moment that there's a kind of flexibility, they can adapt to all levels of variables so that they stay stable. This is true for the exchange rate, for fiscality, and also the cost of work. This can change if there's clear visibility. That's the first answer I would give. And the second response, and this is the answer I just give as a French and European citizen, and a way associate this question of employment, we should perhaps think about the quantity of work. In terms of employment cost, we need to think about the quantity of work. Maya, just one minute just to conclude. It's impossible to conclude because we've had a really rich discussion, I think, despite the heat. Thank you to each of them. I just want to come back to 3 points that have been underlined. First of all, the importance of the product. There's no point helping with money if there's no entrepreneurs behind this who have a clear vision of their product and market. The second thing that's said is the importance of skills. It's human resources, human capital. We need to train people. We need to make these jobs attractive. It's the people behind this that's really important. The third thing is that we're not looking for aid and money from the state. It's a good thing because there isn't any at the moment. But what we're looking from the state is a flexible regulatory context which is safe and which supports the ecosystem with local commitments and different players. Thank you very much to our 5 speakers. Thank you. Good afternoon, all of you.